The sun hung lazily in the afternoon sky, casting a soft golden glow across the suburban backyard, where 10-year-old Ethan played with his father's retired canine German Shepherd Max. The boy giggled as he hurled a bright yellow tennis ball toward the fence, watching the big dog sprint after it with powerful strides. Max had always been lively, even though he was no longer on active duty. He had served 3 years in the police force before Ethan's father adopted him, and since then he had become more than just a family pet. He was Ethan's best friend, his partner in every little adventure. But today, something felt different. As Ethan prepared to throw the ball again, Max stopped mid-run and froze in place, his body tensing like a drawn bow. His sharp brown eyes, usually playful and warm, locked onto Ethan's right hand, with an intensity that sent a strange chill crawling up the boy's spine. Ethan looked down at his hand, confused. There was nothing there. No blood, no scratch, nothing unusual at all. But Max didn't blink. His gaze was unrelenting, almost like he was seeing something invisible to everyone else. "Max," Ethan called, his voice breaking slightly. "What's wrong, boy?" He waved the tennis ball, expecting Max to leap back into action, but the dog stood rooted to the ground, ears twitching, breathing slow and heavy, every muscle tight with alertness. Inside the house, Sarah, Ethan's mom, had been folding laundry when she noticed the silence outside. Usually the backyard was filled with Ethan's laughter and Max's happy barks, but now there was nothing but still air. Curious and slightly uneasy, she stepped onto the patio. "Ethan?" she called softly, then spotted the strange scene. Ethan standing awkwardly in the middle of the yard, Max glaring at his hand like a soldier detecting an unseen threat. Sarah frowned and walked over, crouching next to Ethan. "Max, what is it?" she asked, trying to read the dog's behavior. At that moment, Max let out a low, almost inaudible growl, a sound Sarah hadn't heard from him in months, maybe years. It wasn't a warning growl directed at Ethan. It was different, protective, cautious, and deeply unsettled. Sarah reached for Ethan's hand and noticed something tiny, something she would have missed entirely if Max hadn't reacted. Just below his wrist was a faint red dot, almost like a tiny puncture. "Sweetie, did you scratch yourself?" she asked, gently touching the mark. Ethan shook his head, puzzled. "I don't think so. I didn't feel anything." There was no pain, no bleeding, just a barely visible spot. But Max wasn't convinced. He crept closer, sniffing Ethan's hand rapidly, his nose twitching as if he were trying to solve a mystery no one else could understand. Then he did something strange. He looked up at Sarah, locking eyes with her, and whined softly, almost pleadingly. Sarah had never seen him act like this before. A sudden unease washed over her, but she brushed it aside, telling herself it was probably nothing. "It's fine, Max," she said, stroking his head. "Just a little scratch." But Max didn't move. He kept staring at Ethan's hand like his life depended on it. A soft breeze rustled the leaves above, and Ethan prepared to throw the ball again. But before he could, Max lunged forward, not aggressively, but urgently, and blocked Ethan with his body, nudging him backward toward the house. "Max, what are you doing?" Ethan laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of game. But Max wasn't playing. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then turned his head toward the big oak tree near the fence. His tail stiffened, ears perked high, and his entire stance shifted from playful companion to trained protector. Sarah followed his gaze, squinting under the sunlight, but all she could see was the base of the tree, its roots tangled in the grass. Max began moving toward it cautiously, each step deliberate, his nose close to the ground, sniffing hard. Suddenly, he froze again, his body lowering instinctively, ready to pounce if needed. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest as she took a few steps closer, and then she saw it, a tiny flicker of movement beneath the shadows of the roots. Something coiled, something alive, something dangerous. Max growled deep in his throat, and Sarah felt the air grow heavy around them. She grabbed Ethan's shoulder instinctively, pulling him back, even though she didn't yet understand what they were dealing with. But Max knew. Somehow, he always knew. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the base of the oak tree. At first, it was hard to see clearly through the shadows, but then a slight movement gave it away. A long, scaled body coiled tightly against the roots, its patterned skin blending perfectly with the earth beneath it. Her stomach turned cold when she saw the triangular head and the faint rattle twitching at the end of its tail. A rattlesnake. For a moment, the world seemed to blur. Sarah instinctively stepped back, pulling Ethan behind her as her grip tightened around his small wrist. Ethan hadn't seen it yet, but Max had. Max had known long before anyone else. The dog's low growl deepened, and his fur stood on end. He positioned himself between Ethan and the tree, his entire body forming a shield. "Ethan, don't move," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking but firm. Ethan frowned in confusion. "Why? What's wrong?" He tried to peek around her, but Sarah pulled him closer. "Just stay behind me, baby. Don't move a muscle." But Max wasn't waiting. He edged forward slowly, his movements deliberate, head low, ears locked on the predator in front of him. The rattlesnake's tongue flicked out rapidly, sensing vibrations in the air. It didn't strike yet, but its body tightened with every passing second. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, her mind racing. And then, suddenly, she remembered the small red puncture on Ethan's hand. She grabbed his wrist and looked again. The swelling had worsened. A faint blush was spreading across his skin, and she finally put the pieces together. Ethan must have brushed against the grass earlier without realizing, and the snake must have struck him once before retreating to its hiding place. Panic shot through her veins like lightning. "Ethan," she said, trying to sound calm though. Fear gripped her throat. "We need to get inside. Now." But Ethan's voice trembled as he whispered, "Mom, am I okay?" Sarah forced a reassuring smile she didn't feel. "You will be, sweetheart. Max and I won't let anything happen to you." Her words were for him, but her eyes darted back to Max, silently pleading for his help. Max barked once, short, sharp, commanding. He glanced back at Sarah and Ethan, then faced the snake again, his body perfectly still, waiting for any sudden movement. Sarah knew she couldn't waste another second. She scooped Ethan into her arms, his small body trembling against her chest, and took a careful step backward toward the house. Max stayed in front, moving with them, his gaze never leaving. The threat. The snake finally hissed, its tail rattling louder now, warning them to stay away. Sarah swallowed hard and forced herself to move slowly, resisting every instinct screaming at her to run. One wrong step, one loud sound, and the snake could strike again. When they finally reached the patio, Max barked sharply, breaking his silence, and then sprinted past them into the house. Sarah didn't question it. She followed immediately, slamming the sliding glass door behind her. Ethan clung to her, breathing fast, his face pale. She set him down gently on the couch and examined his hand again. The swelling had worsened, the redness spreading rapidly. "Oh, God," she whispered under her breath, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers, explaining the situation as calmly as she could, but her voice cracked more than once. The operator's instructions were clear. Keep Ethan still, keep the bite below heart level if possible, and get him to the hospital immediately. Sarah grabbed her keys, scooped Ethan up again, and headed for the car. But as she opened the front door, she noticed Max was already waiting there, standing rigidly, as though he understood exactly what was happening. He followed them closely, refusing to leave Ethan's side. The drive to the hospital was a blur of speeding streets and flashing red lights in Sarah's mind. But through it all, Max remained calm, his head resting gently on Ethan's lap as the boy whimpered softly. "Mom, it doesn't hurt that bad," Ethan whispered weakly, trying to be brave. Sarah's throat tightened and she blinked away tears. "I know, baby. We're almost there." She glanced at Max in the rearview mirror. He was watching Ethan closely, his dark eyes unblinking, his breathing slow and measured, as though silently telling him, "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." Ethan's tiny fingers rested in Max's fur, clinging to the warmth and comfort of his presence. Sarah's foot pressed harder on the accelerator, her mind torn between fear and gratitude. If it hadn't been for Max, She might never have noticed the mark on Ethan's hand. They might have dismissed it, wasting precious hours Ethan didn't have. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. As the hospital finally came into view, Sarah whispered a shaky prayer under her breath. Max's ears perked, as though he somehow understood their desperate hope. Sarah didn't know it yet, but Max had just saved Ethan's life, and his job wasn't over yet. The car screeched to a halt in front of the hospital entrance, tires squealing as Sarah jumped out, clutching Ethan in her arms. Max leapt from the back seat and landed beside her with the agility of a trained soldier, his body tense, his instincts razor sharp. Sarah burst through the sliding glass doors, her voice trembling as she shouted, "Snakebite! My son's been bitten!" Almost instantly, nurses and doctors rushed forward, guiding her to the emergency area while Max trotted closely behind, never letting Ethan out of his sight. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as they hurried down the bright white corridor, Sarah's heartbeat pounding in her ears. They laid Ethan on a hospital bed, his tiny face pale, sweat beading along his forehead, his breathing shallow and uneven. "Ma'am, we need you to step back," a nurse said firmly, but Sarah couldn't move, her hands gripping Ethan's shirt as though letting go would make him slip away. "Please," she whispered, "please save him." A doctor quickly examined the swollen hand, now turning an angry shade of red, and barked urgent orders to the team. "We need the antivenom. Now, set up an IV, monitor vitals, prepare for potential anaphylaxis." Sarah watched helplessly as they pricked Ethan's arm with needles, inserted tubes, and strapped monitors to his chest. Every beep of the heart monitor felt like thunder in her ears. But through the chaos, Max stood at the corner of the room, his sharp brown eyes fixed on Ethan, his body trembling ever so slightly as though sensing the boy's pain. Sarah knelt beside him, stroking his fur with one hand while wiping her tears with the other. "You saved him, Max," she whispered shakily. "Please, don't let him go." The dog let out a soft whine, his tail thumping once against the cold tile floor, as if reassuring her that he wasn't going anywhere. Minutes crawled by like hours as the antivenom coursed through Ethan's veins. The doctor explained in a calm but urgent tone, "The venom spreads quickly. We've caught it early thanks to you bringing him in, but it's still dangerous. Watch his breathing." Sarah nodded frantically, clinging to every word, praying silently with all her strength. Ethan stirred weakly, his eyelids fluttering as he whispered, "Mom." She leaned closer, taking his small hand into hers. "I'm right here, baby. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Ethan's lips trembled as he murmured, "Is Max here?" Sarah smiled through her tears and glanced at the shepherd, who perked up at the sound of his name. "He's right here, sweetheart. He hasn't left your side." Max padded forward, resting his chin gently on the edge of the hospital bed, his warm breath brushing Ethan's arm. Ethan's tiny fingers reached out, trembling, and brushed against Max's fur. The dog licked his hand softly, and for the first time since the bite, Ethan smiled faintly. Hours passed in a blur of machines beeping, nurses checking charts, and doctors moving swiftly around the room. Sarah sat by the bed, holding Ethan's hand with one and Max's collar with the other, as though tethering them both to life. At one point, the monitors spiked, and Sarah's breath caught, panic rising like a wave. But the doctor calmly adjusted the IV and reassured her. "He's responding well to the antivenom. Just give it time." Still, Sarah couldn't relax. Her mind replayed every moment. Max's frozen stare, his growl, the snake coiled beneath the tree, and she realized with a shiver how close they had come to losing Ethan. If Max hadn't noticed the bite, if he hadn't warned them. She couldn't even bear to finish the thought. As the hours slipped by, Ethan's color slowly returned, his breathing steadied, and the swelling in his hand began to subside. Relief flooded Sarah's chest, so powerful it left her dizzy. She leaned against Max, burying her face into his fur, whispering, "Thank you, boy. Thank you for saving my son." Max licked her cheek softly, his deep eyes steady and calm, as though he understood every word. Just as Sarah began to exhale the weight of the night, The doctor returned with a gentle smile. "He's out of danger now," he said warmly. "You got him here in time. Your boy's going to be just fine." Sarah broke down in tears, hugging Ethan tightly, careful not to squeeze him too hard. Ethan murmured weakly, "See, Mom? Told you Max is the best dog in the world." Sarah laughed softly through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He's more than the best. He's our guardian angel." Max wagged his tail for the first time that day, curling up at Ethan's bedside. His body pressed close as though vowing silently to never leave him unprotected again. In that moment, Sarah realized something profound. Max hadn't just saved Ethan's life. He had reminded them all of something deeper, that sometimes heroes don't wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs, guided by instincts we'll never fully understand, but forever be grateful for. Morning sunlight spilled gently into the hospital room, soft and warm, casting golden beams across the white sheets where Ethan slept peacefully. The beeping machines had slowed to a steady, reassuring rhythm, a comforting sound after the chaos of the night before. Sarah sat beside the bed, her hand resting on her son's, finally breathing without the weight of fear crushing her chest. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to truly look at him. His small chest rising and falling, his lips no longer pale, the faint blush returning to his cheeks. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks under her breath, her gaze drifting toward Max, who lay curled up protectively at the foot of the bed. His ears twitched with every sound in the hallway, and his dark brown eyes scanned the room every so often, always alert, always watchful, even in rest. Sarah marveled at him, at the incredible loyalty that had brought them here, at the unspoken instinct that had saved her son's life. Without Max's warning, they would have never noticed the snake bite until it was too late. The thought still sent a cold shiver down her spine. When Ethan finally stirred, blinking awake, he turned his head slowly toward Max, who immediately perked up, his tail thumping softly against the mattress. "Hey, buddy," Ethan whispered weakly, his voice rough but full of relief. Max leapt gently onto the bed, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires, and rested his head beside Ethan's shoulder. Ethan wrapped his tiny arms around Max's neck as best he could and whispered, "You saved me, boy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she brushed a strand of hair from Ethan's forehead, smiling softly. "He sure did, sweetheart. He's our hero." Just then, the doctor walked in holding a clipboard and smiling warmly. "Good morning," he greeted. "How's our little fighter feeling today?" Ethan managed a small grin. "Better," he said, glancing at Max. "Because of him." The doctor chuckled and knelt beside the bed, gently checking Ethan's hand. "The swelling has gone down significantly," he said. "No permanent damage. You're a lucky young man. That dog of yours may have saved your life." Sarah smiled, her voice trembling as she replied, "We know. We'll never be able to thank him enough." Word of Max's heroism spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses stopped by to pet him. Doctors paused to smile, and other patients whispered softly as they passed by the room, pointing at the big German shepherd lying faithfully by his boy's side. Some even took photos, saying they'd never seen a dog act with such awareness and precision. By the time Ethan was discharged 2 days later, Max had become something of a local legend, though he seemed blissfully unaware of all the attention. For him, nothing had changed. His only mission was keeping Ethan safe. As they left the hospital, Sarah noticed a small group of people gathered near the entrance. Among them was a local reporter holding a microphone. "Are you the family with the K9 who saved the boy?" she asked eagerly. Sarah hesitated, but Ethan beamed proudly. "That's Max," he exclaimed, hugging the dog's neck tightly. The reporter knelt down, smiling at Ethan. "Can you tell us what happened?" Ethan nodded and began describing the whole story in his own innocent way, how Max had stared at his hand, how he'd growled, and how he'd found the rattlesnake under the tree. The reporter looked at Max, awestruck, and said softly, "He's more than a pet. He's a hero." Sarah smiled and replied, "He's family." Over the following weeks, Ethan recovered fully, though the tiny scar on his wrist would remain forever, a quiet reminder of that terrifying day. But the bond between Ethan and Max grew even stronger, unshakable, almost sacred. They were inseparable. Wherever Ethan went, Max followed, his sharp eyes always scanning, his ears always listening. Sarah often caught herself watching them together, and every time she did, her heart swelled with gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan sat cross-legged in the backyard, tossing Max's favorite tennis ball. Max retrieved it faithfully, dropping it into Ethan's lap each time, his tail wagging happily. At one point, Ethan paused, holding the ball in his hands, and looked deeply into Max's eyes. "I love you, Max," he whispered softly, his voice full of meaning. Max nudged his head against Ethan's shoulder, letting out a low, contented rumble, as though saying, "I love you too." Sarah watched from the patio, tears stinging her eyes, knowing deep down that Max's instincts had given her son the greatest gift of all: more time, more laughter, more memories yet to come. Sometimes she thought about how close they had come to losing everything, and how, in one single moment, a dog's unspoken understanding had changed everything. From that day forward, Sarah made sure everyone she knew understood the story, not just because she double